we're going to read about a statement that Jesus makes that's a little, it's a little perplexing, because at first glance, it doesn't seem to make sense. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Like, what's the big deal over the statement? And we'll take a look at it together. So Luke 9, if you're there, I really encourage you to open the Bible and look at it with me. And then let's go to the very end of the chapter. Luke 9, the very end of the chapter. And so Jesus is we have three different examples. We're going to just focus on one. Jesus has put out the call, and people say, I will follow, right? And so in verse 61, we read, and another also said, Lord, I will follow thee. But let me first go bid them farewell, which are at home at my house. Now, right, the statement seems pretty straightforward. The man says, I'm going to follow you, Lord. Let me just go say goodbye. Let me say farewell to the people that are at my house. And Jesus responds, and this is the challenge and the question that I had, is Jesus responds and says unto him, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. And so the man, Jesus kind of like slams the man. He slams him for saying, let me go say goodbye. And it seems a little weird, doesn't it? And especially if you think of another example where the exact same thing happened in Scripture. And in 1 Kings, and we'll turn to that in a second, Elijah is asked by Elisha the prophet to follow him. And he says, let me go home and basically say goodbye. And Elijah says, okay, whatever, right? And so we have in the Old Testament an example where somebody wants to go say goodbye before he follows, and we get it, okay, whatever, and he ends up being an amazing prophet. And here, in this passage, that we have a man that says, let me go, I will follow you, let me go say goodbye. And Jesus kind of responds, if you don't drop everything right now and follow me right now, you aren't fit for the kingdom. And it seems a little weird. That doesn't seem right, does it? So let's look at the Old Testament and look at this passage in the Old Testament as a comparison, just to get our bearings straight. So look at 1 Kings with me. So let's turn to 1 Kings, if you know where 1 Kings is at. It's right before 2 Kings, by the way. And it's right after Samuel's. So you can, just to give you a little bit of reference. 1 Kings 19. And we're not going to read, this whole passage. We're just going to read a few verses here right at the very end. And so in verse 19 of chapter 19, we read, so he departed thence. And this is Elijah, right, the prophet, who's a prophet in the Old Testament. He departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. So basically, cast his mantle, like his cloak, basically saying, you're going to be the next prophet, come follow me. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, go back again, for what have I done to thee? Basically saying, go ahead. What have I done to keep you from doing so? Okay, that's the kind of the translation. And he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen. So he went home. He took a yoke of oxen, slew them, boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen, and gave unto the people, and they did eat. And then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. So we see that Elijah did not have a problem with what Elisha was suggesting to do. So what is the problem in this situation back in Luke? So if we turn back to Luke, so if we read that verse 61 again, and another also said, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me first go bid them farewell, which are at home in my house. So the thought here when you look at that first phrase in verse 61, does it sound like the man is kind of going, sure, I'm going to follow you? Or is he like, I'm going to follow you? Is this the kind of thing that maybe you've all done at one point or time in your life? I see it almost every day, is when we tell a certain somebody to pick up or to clean up, right? That certain somebody says, I will, after I'm done playing, or after I'm done watching this, or after I'm done with X, right? And then we say, no, clean it up now. And then the response is, but I'm playing with it still. Does that sound right? For me, that sounds familiar, right? Especially if you've got anybody who's the age of like 6 or younger, and maybe between the ages of 2 and 6, right? Well, I'm not done playing with it. I'll clean it up when I'm done playing with it. And then the next thing in our house is, you're not playing with it. You're watching TV or you're doing something else. But I will play with it. Right? Everything is so that I don't have to clean up right now, right? That is not the sense that we're getting with this person. It seems like this person is really diligent. I will follow. I'm determined to follow you. I just have one request. Right? Before I follow you, let me go home and say goodbye to the people that are at my house. What's the issue? So I guess maybe we have to take a look at verse 62 and understand what Jesus is saying that the challenge is, so that we can understand a little bit better what the problem is with his request. So in verse 62, Jesus says, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Now, I'm guessing that most of us don't have a clear picture of this analogy, because unless we were born in the early 1800s, any plow that we have seen other than at Greenfield Village or in Henry Ford Museum sitting on a stand somewhere will have been mechanized. Right? In the 1850s, they started with steam plows. I checked just so that I could get my dates straight. So for most of us, if you used the farm equipment, it was machines, and it was machines that were doing the plowing, not a horse or oxen. And so I was trying to think of another contemporary analogy to what Jesus is saying, and I came up with one that probably every one of us can relate to. As I look around the room, the only ones that don't are under the age of 5 in this place today. And I'm assuming everybody here drives. Oh, Ryan. Sorry, you're not driving yet, but you've experienced this because of your siblings. All right, you've lived this. Okay, so driver's training. There's a lot of fear that comes with driver's training, mostly for the person in the passenger seat when it comes to driver's training, right? It's the person that's either in the back seat or in the passenger seat when somebody's going through driver's training. And if you're the mom or the dad, there's been a lot of situations that you can talk to about the scary parts of driver's training. If you've been the driver, there's probably been times where you've maybe panicked as a driver. But there's one particular one that is ultra, ultra scary for probably everybody involved. And that is getting on the freeway for the first time. So now, if you're a guy, maybe you weren't scared getting on the freeway for the first time as a driver. As the dad or the mom, you were probably freaked out. Think about it, for those of you that have done it, or those of you that have experienced it on the driver's side. Right, you pulling onto the freeway, onto that on-ramp, no problem. Making that right-hand turn or the left-hand turn, probably no problem. The acceleration, no problem. Now, if you're the dad and you're in the passenger seat, right? Those of you that are in the driver's seat, you're probably not going fast enough. If you're the mom, then you're probably going, well, wait, you're accelerating too quickly. I'm just kidding, but it's probably somewhat accurate. And you accelerate away, right? You're giving it a lot of gas, and you're accelerating away, and you're getting on that on-ramp. And then we get to the moment of truth, because as you're getting close to merging, something has to happen. Your first thing is probably to look in the rearview mirror to see if anybody's coming, but you know from what your instructor told you is that that's not enough, right? There's somebody in your blind spot. And so as you're merging, you're supposed to you turn on the turn signal, and you're supposed to look over your shoulder to see who's in your blind spot. And so you're holding onto the steering wheel in the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock positions, right? And now you look over. See what I did? Remember this? Remember this? You look over. Because as you turn to look to the left shoulder goes down, the right shoulder goes up. As the left shoulder goes down and the right shoulder go up, and you're holding on to the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock, what happens to your arms? Your arms rotate a little bit, and your hands are holding on tight, right? And what happens to that steering wheel? It starts to turn. And if your mom or dad are in the car and it's not your brother or sister, and if it's a driving instructor, what do? Well, if they're really on top of things, they grab the steering wheel just to make sure that it doesn't turn with the way you look. Because that's what happens. And we kind of chuckle, but we've all gone through it, right? And if somebody wasn't with you and on top of things as you were trying to merge, all of a sudden you merged a lot quicker than you intended. And maybe you got a honking because there was a car in your blind spot and they had to swerve as you merged into that right lane of the highway, right? But if somebody was with you, they grabbed it and kept you straight and you merged straight. And it's supposed to be just for a second that I look over, and then I'm supposed to turn back and I'm supposed to go in straight again. But it's a lot harder than it looks, isn't it? So that analogy, there's a lot of them actually that come into play. With swimming, for those of you that swam in high school or in college or even just on teams or even for fun, I would do laps in a pool just for exercise when I was younger. And if you're doing the stroke and you're not looking up, I'd always smack the rope, the lines that were next to me, right? Because you start to turn and you can't be straight. And they say that in open water, that you're supposed to have if you're trying to swim in a straight line, you have to every once in a while do a peek just to keep your eye on that marker in the distance, because otherwise you're going to start to curve off. And so Jesus, the analogy that Jesus is saying is that when a person puts his hands on the plow, and he's trying to guide this oxen down this rough field to cut a line. And that line is supposed to be straight until they get to the end of the field. Right? The only way to do that is to concentrate on the line, to concentrate on that prize in the distance and on the lines that have been cut next to me so that I can keep going straight. And that if I look back when my hands are on the plow, I am doing not 1800s, 1700s, all the way to the 300 BCs when they had plows. I'm doing the equivalent of doing this when I'm driving, of turning that steering wheel as I look over my shoulder. Right? That's the equivalent, and that's the warning that Jesus gives. And he says that nobody who when they get on that plow and they put their hands on the plow to guide the horse or the oxen or whatever it is down that field, right? No man, if they look back, are fit to guide that plow. Because you're going to be going, whoa, right off. And then, I'm not going to get into the details. I read up a little bit on it as to why this is a problem. But again, for most of us, we're not farmers. There's all kinds of issues that come into play when you start to go off track when you're trying to plow a field, right? Because then there's parts that are plowed, parts that aren't, parts that are soft, parts that aren't, parts that are bumpy, parts that aren't. And if you're trying to fix it later, I guess it becomes a really big nightmare. So the analogy would have been very clear for the people of this time, as Jesus is saying. And this idea of keeping the path straight is something that we hear over and over and over again in Scripture. The idea that the path that I'm supposed to be on is straight. And so what Jesus is speaking to in Psalms 5, verse 8, we would read, "Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face." Make it clear as to where I need to go. In Psalms we read. In Isaiah 42, verse 16, this is a prophecy. "And I will bring the blind," and this is God speaking through Isaiah, and this is what he says about the future. And he says, "And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. And I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. Right? And so we see this, and I can tell you that I'm not going to read them all because there's more than we need to. You'll get the point. The last one that I'm going to read is in Matthew, and it's John the Baptist, who's the prophet just before Jesus. Right? He's coming just before Jesus, and he says in Matthew 3:3, "For this is he," as he's proclaiming Jesus, "for this is he that was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." And so this is actually, I apologize, this is the prophet about John the Baptist, that he's the one that is coming before to proclaim this, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. But the prophecy is about Jesus. Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. And so this idea of a straight line, right? The straight and narrow. We can set our eyes on the prize of where we're supposed to go because we can see it. It's not supposed to be complicated. Becoming a believer, following Jesus, living for him, being guided by him is not supposed to be complicated. It's not supposed to be twisty and turny and curvy and hilly and every other example and analogy you can think of. It's supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be straight. It's supposed to be clear. It's not supposed to be complicated. And so Jesus says to the man who says, "I'm going to follow you, but let me go say goodbye," if you choose my path, you need to focus on the prize. Right? If you choose my path, you need to focus on it. You need to focus on it in the distance and go and stay focused. And if we want to extend this analogy a little bit in that yoke, right, and the plow, there's other lines next to you. You need to focus that you're following that straight line. That's where you need to go. That's what Jesus is saying. And he's now saying that because you want to go home and say goodbye, that you're not ready. You're not fit. You're not the one that's going to set your eyes on the mark and go. And the question is why? Because in 1 Kings, we saw that Elisha did that. And so what's the issue with this man? Now that we understand what Jesus' concern is, what's the issue with going home to say goodbye? And the other said, "I will follow you, but let me go bid them farewell." And so if we look at this in detail and consider the implications of a statement like that I'm going to follow you, right? I'm going to follow you, but let me go say goodbye to everybody that's at my house first. What are the issues that Jesus might have with that statement? So first, I want to follow, but I want to say goodbye. In some level, I might be reading into this a little bit too much, but you tell me afterwards. All right? In some level, there's a sense that my goodbye and that this move that I'm making is a tough task. Right? I need to go say goodbye. Following you is not easy. That I'm giving up a lot to do this. In a way, this is more than just a kiss goodbye. I'm off, Mom, Dad, see ya. I got to go. I got another, right? The notion that we got with Elisha was that, hey, let me go, and he did, let me go kiss my mom and dad and then say, see ya, right? I'm off. There's a longing that you almost sense with the word farewell. There's a this is a big deal. This is a big decision that I'm making. And I'm leaving a lot of people behind. And I'm going to be on a tough road. And so I got to go say goodbye. So let's go through one. This is a tough task. I might never see my family and friends again. So give me the time to go say my goodbyes, to go say farewell. This is also, by implication, a sacrifice. I am making a sacrifice. Not only am I taking on a tough task, and I might never see you again, Mom and Dad, so I might never see them again, so I better go say goodbye to them, Jesus, I'm separating. But this is a sacrifice. This isn't something I relish and I treasure, Jesus. You're asking me to follow you, right? I'm making a sacrifice. I'm giving up something to follow you. So let me go say my farewells, Jesus, because I've had a life. I've had a lot of friends. I had a path, a career. I have family at home. And I'm going to give them up for you. Right? I'm going to give them up for you. So the least you could do is just I need to go say my farewells for them. So we've got two perspectives on let me go say farewell. One is I might never see them again. That this is serious task. It's tough. It's sayonara. It's adios. Pick the language. It's do widzenia, right? It's whatever language you want to use. It's a long-term goodbye. I'm never going to see them again, so let me say goodbye. The second one is I'm making a sacrifice, right? This isn't just about you. This is the things that I'm giving up for you. It's almost, if I put that spin on it and that thought process on it, that I'm kind of looking back with longing about what I had as I go toward Jesus. The last one, and this was me when I was younger and wanted to follow Jesus, but didn't necessarily want to follow Jesus. And the idea that, what's everybody going to think? And what I mean by that is when I make the commitment and I decide to follow Jesus, how wise is it to go back to the very people who might persuade me to not follow Jesus? I'm going to ask that question again. If I were to decide to follow Jesus, how wise is it to go back to the people who would very likely persuade me to not follow Jesus or tempt me to not follow Jesus? Right? And so by going home, it's not just mom and dad here. It's let me bid farewell to those that are at the home. We get a sense that there's more people. He's literally going back to the people that might tempt him to not follow. And so we have three different kind of categories. One is the toughness of the task. The second is the sacrifice that I am making to follow you, Jesus. And the third is the temptation that I'm putting before myself to actually not follow through with what I'm deciding to do. Now, the comparison to this is in Elijah is interesting, right? Because Elijah, what Elijah does is he goes home to kiss his parents, and then we read, and I don't know if you picked up on it, what does he do after he kisses his parents goodbye? So remember what he was doing before. He was plowing the field. It says he had 12 yoke of oxen. We're not sure. There's not enough information if it meant there were 12 separate yoke, like 12 separate plows going, and there were people doing it for him and with him, or if he literally had such a rough field that he had 6 pairs of oxen pulling one yoke, okay, pulling one plow. And so we're not sure what the picture is, but what we read is that after he goes home to say goodbye to his parents and kiss them goodbye, he takes the oxen, he sacrifices them to God, and he burns the yokes, the tools that tied them all together. The implication is when he went home, he literally took the things that could keep him from following and destroyed them, right? He had no choice. He had nothing left to hold him back from following. So there was an intentionality, there was a deliberateness to what Elijah did, I always get them mixed up, to what Elijah did when he decided to follow Elisha, when he took on that call. But we have another example of a very similar situation, not of somebody who went home, who wanted to go home to kiss their parents, but can you think of somebody who looked back? I see some smiles. So some people know their Bible. For those of us, you will now remember this story because there is another person that looked back. And this very similar parallel to the thinking, into the thinking that Jesus is implying in this statement to the man who decides to follow him. And this story is about a man named Lot. And let's just get everybody caught up because there's no way we have enough time to read this whole thing. So Lot was Abraham's nephew. And let's just clarify for all of us who's Abraham, right? So Abraham is the father of all the Jews, of the Jewish faith, right? He's the father of their faith. And he was sent by God, and he didn't know where he was going, but he was sent by God, and he took his nephew with him. And his nephew was Lot. And they reached, as they were traveling, their wealth grew, right? They got richer. And back in that day, how did you get richer? You had more animals. And as you had more animals, like sheep and goats, right, flocks, you needed to have more employees to watch, a.k.a. shepherds, to watch all the animals. And at some point, the flocks and the shepherds that Lot had and the ones that Abraham had got so big that there started to become friction between them. And so Abraham says to Lot, listen, we need to separate. Look around. Look at everything. They're stood up on a hill somewhere. Look around. Pick where you want to go. Where you want to go with your flocks. So I don't want to be enemies with you. Pick where you want to go, and I will go in the other direction. So he gives Lot the choice. And Lot, he looks. And I can't remember if it was to the left or the right. I don't have my geography exactly right, but let's just play this out, right? Lot looks one way, and it's very arid and rocky and somewhat hilly. And I'm guessing there was stuff for the flocks to eat, but it wasn't very pretty. And he looks the other way, and it's fertile and lush. And it's in the plains next to a river, more than likely, that we're feeding all of that lushness. And there's people, and there's a beautiful city out in the distance. And it looks like the place to be. I mean, I get a metropolis, plus I get the lushness of the suburbia surrounding the metropolis. My flocks can eat. He didn't call it suburbia, just to be clear, and he didn't call it a metropolis, right? That's Bob's translation. But he looks at it, and he sees something really nice. And he goes, I'm going there. And we're not going to talk about what Abraham did. We're going to just focus on Lot for a minute, because Lot goes there. And there was one thing that he didn't pay attention to when he went there, and that was the evil that was in the place. Because not only was the place lush, not only was it a metropolis, not only was it just looked great, but it attracted all kinds of people. And it's ironic. It is literally ironic to the parallel that we see today, because the metropolis is where the money is, and it's where the evil is. It's where the sin goes to, right? And that's what was happening in that metropolis. And those metropolises that were around there were named Sodom, and they were named Gomorrah. And they were great places to live if you wanted to have all kinds of sin, and if you wanted to do all kinds of evil. And that's where he went, because it looked good. And so that's where we get to. And then we get to Genesis 19, verses 16 and 17, and then we're going to skip to verses 24 through 26, because the end result is those cities are going to get destroyed. And the angels, and we won't go into all the details, but if you want to, read Genesis 18 and 19. I would really encourage you, if you want to get the story, the full picture of the evil that was going on in that place, read Genesis 18 and 19, and you'll get a picture. But God says he's going to destroy that city and those places. And there's this bargaining that goes on with Abraham about not destroying everything. And so it's going to get destroyed, but God saves Lot and his family, right? That he commits to saving Lot and his family. And so this is what we read in Genesis 19, verse 16 and 17. And while he lingered, this is speaking to Lot, and while he lingered, the men, aka our angels, if you read all of 18 and 19, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city, right? They basically like dragged him, carried him, or led him outside of the city, and they set him outside the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. So basically, you got to go. You can't stay here. This is not safe, and you can't stay in the plains, in the fertile areas surrounding these cities. You got to go. It's all coming down. And as we skip to verse 24, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And so we read that story, right? And we don't know, did she literally just transform into a pillar? Did brimstone fall and literally make her into, hot salt? She became salt. The premise behind that story is the wife looking back with longing on what she was leaving behind. Right? Looking back with longing on what she was leaving behind. And so the conclusion for us, as we think about these stories and about what Jesus is saying in Luke chapter 9, is that when we look back, our path angles. Our path deviates. Like the driver's training story, right? The path, we angle and we go off. And if our path goes off, trying to find the mark again is not as easy as we think it will be all the time. And so Jesus is saying, if you're going to follow me, then you need to identify the prize in the distance, right? You look at that mark, and if we want that prize, we can't take our eyes off that prize. And so, friends, I know there's a number of you here that have maybe made the choice, but aren't following through on that mark. And maybe some of you haven't even made the choice yet. But if you're here, and if you've made that choice, don't look back. Right? If you've decided to follow Jesus, don't look back. Don't look to the side. You can't take your eyes off of it. I mean, if you look back when you first start, the first thing that you'll be off at the start. Right? You gotta stay focused on the prize of the high calling of Jesus Christ. And if I feel this is hard, right? If I'm the man and I feel that this is hard, this is what Jesus says. In Matthew 11, verse 28, he says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." If you think this is hard, Jesus is going to get you through it. You're not doing it on your own. Right? You're not on your own. Jesus has promised that he will be there with you. "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart." I love you, basically, and you will find rest in your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. If you take on Jesus, you will find comfort in the direction that he gives. You will not be on your own. You will not be trying to make choices in the dark as you're stumbling about trying to figure out what to do, right? He gives you the direction. And even though that sounds scary to take direction from somebody else, and it sounds wrong in this life, in this day and age, when we're supposed to be independent and doing things ourselves and on our own and have free will and just do whatever we want, Jesus says, if you take my yoke, If you take my direction, my yoke is light. It's going to be straight. I'll tell you where to go. All you have to do is stick with it. If you feel that you have a lot to lose, right? If you think, I want to follow Jesus, but what are my friends going to think? I want to follow Jesus, but what's going to happen with my family? I want to follow Jesus, but my lifestyle doesn't align with Jesus. I don't want to leave all that behind. Jesus has this to say in Matthew 6, verse 19 through 21. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. You know, the point for us is that no matter how much we accumulate, no matter how many friends we have, no matter our lifestyle, no matter our career, no matter our wealth, you will lose it. That's a guarantee. That's a fact. It's not a threat. It's not me making things up. It's a fact. You can become the president of the United States. You will one day lose your memory. If you live that long, and you will lose it, and you will be alone, and you will be in a chair. Perhaps it's a wheelchair, perhaps it's in a bed. No matter how far we get, our bodies will fail and we will lose it. You can be the president of Microsoft or the CEO of Apple. You can get as high as you want. You can be as famous as you want. You can have 25 million followers on Instagram. You will lose it. And so Jesus says, don't try to set yourself up for something that's going to fail. Set yourself up for something that won't fail. In Luke 9, a little bit earlier in our chapter here, in verses 23 through 25, and he said unto them, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whosoever will save his life has to lose it, has to give it up. For what is a man advantaged? What advantage do you have if you gain the whole world and lose your life? Maybe you were like me and worried about your friends and allowed your friends to influence you. I remember so many times being at camp and being in this church. I was actually in the pew that Tom is sitting in. I remember this to this day, right? In that back row, when somebody up here was preaching about giving your life to Jesus. And I remember being in that back row, right where Tom is, and knowing that I needed to give my life to Jesus. Knowing that I had to do it. And when the sermon was over, and the service was over, the friend next to me got up and walked out. And you want to know what I did? You know it, because every one of you's done it. You got up and you walk out with them, right? And that's exactly what I did from that back row. I remember it to this day, because I also remember to this day the time at camp when I decided to follow. And my friends got up, and I got up, and we all walked out into the aisle, and they went to the back, and I went to the front. Because I had decided. Romans 12:2 says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Right? That is what will happen. That is what can happen when you decide to follow Jesus. And if you're worried about your friends and you're worried about what they're going to think, I'm going to read this verse in 1 Corinthians 15:33. I'm going to read it in two translations because the King James doesn't, in my mind, really give us a clear picture of what the intent is. And in the King James, it says, "Be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners." All right? The ESV and other translations, the same verse says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." All right? So bad company ruins good morals. We know that. We might not want to do it, but our friends can be bad influences. And sometimes when they walk back, you just got to walk forward and follow the call that Jesus is placed on your heart, regardless of what friends or siblings or whomever will think, because you're going to lay your treasure up in heaven rather than on this earth. Amen.